There are so many different questions that we could raise. I'm pleased to begin to recognize those of you who would like to raise some questions for Dr. Hecker, and if you could identify yourself, Yelena.
And those of you who must leave, you know, I fully understand. I used up more than my allotment of time. Yes, Yelena.
Well, first of all, thank you, Sig. That's amazing. I already sifted through some of the book, but I'm looking forward to look at even more about it. And I also very great that very happy that we were able to actually host some of these meetings in Vienna when you joined
Right,
us.
I did. I should have mentioned that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That was fascinating.
Yeah, in fact, two of the key Russian people I had to bring to Vienna to do the interviews at the Vienna Center.
Yeah.
From Monterey.
But one figure that really caught my attention is that it's not a new figure. It's about $20 billion that the U.S. spent on various threat reduction programs in Russia. Or Soviet Union, depends on how you count it. It's really a very small amount of money if you compare it to some of the other expenses. And one of the programs that was just suspended in the U.S., in Russia, you mentioned the plutonium disposition program. And some of the assessments of the way even one facility, the MOX facility, the costs were already estimated to balloon to $20 billion. Just one facility for that part of the program. So what we've got with all this no loose nukes, low everything, for this money is incredibly cheap, in my view. But the rest of it is just the human dimension, the ties and everything else is even more valuable. That's just a comment. My question though, how do you view this just in general? I think the US was also ready to roll back on the plutonium disposition program. The Russians were happy when it came to, what is your view? Because you're one of the plutonium specialists as well.
First, just to go back, from what I understand, and I'm not sure people have done the accounting correctly, but it's like 12 billion of cooperative threat reduction. Then there was another 12 billion for the HEU-LEU deal, but you can't count that because we got $12 billion worth of low enriched uranium, so 12 billion. So I agree with you completely. Of course, it's a lot of money, but it's a drop in the bucket when you look at the $650 billion, defense budget. So we certainly put that to good use. On things like plutonium disposition, it's actually the one that I worry least about, that they killed that. And the reason for that is I've worked plutonium disposition sort of trying to advise our government. It was clear from the beginning the Russians did not want to do this the way the Americans were forcing them to do it by offering money. And that the Americans wanted them to burn that plutonium in light water reactors, and the Russians said, we're not going to do it. Americans eventually then agreed in the early 2000s, okay, you can burn it in fast breeder reactors, which the Russians had wanted to do. And then the Russians said, okay. So the Russians actually already made a major change on their end. And so now the US had to make a major change because the facility cost, which initially was thought to be 4 to 6 billion, one of the latest estimates was 30-some billion. And there's no way the US should spend that kind of money. It is totally, that's insane to spend that kind of money. So the plutonium disposition, the most important part of killing that, suspending it, is what's important for the rest of the world. To actually have these two countries with huge number of weapons, huge fissile material inventories, actually to agree and then to demonstrate that they have now made a good part of that not usable forevermore in the future. It's the sort of goodwill that would have gotten it. The reality is the Russians don't need that plutonium. They don't need it, so they're going to get rid of it and they're going to burn it in fast reactors. We don't need that plutonium, but we haven't quite figured out exactly what to do with it. Whether it's going to be buried down the Holden Whip or do something else. But neither one of us has any need for that plutonium for our nuclear weapons program. It'll never be used for the nuclear weapons program. The Russians actually said we're not going to use it for a nuclear weapons program. So I think that's not that big a deal. But killing the science and technology agreement, which is sort of what cuts off then, the interface on the scientist. That's
Thanks. I mean, I have a number of questions. Maybe, well, let me ask one while we wait for others to kind of. Oh, Tracy, okay.
Hi, thank you.
Go ahead.
My name is Tracy. This is my first semester in the MPTS program here. And I actually wanted to ask you to elaborate on the science and technology program, which Russia has pulled out of, and the implications of it, since I know you said that was more of a concern to you than, say, the plutonium disposition agreement.
okay. So the S&T agreement, first of all, everything that S&T agreement would allow, it was signed in September 2013, was actually stuff we'd already done, for a dozen years or more. But then around 2001, as I told you, the Russians started to dial back. And so then they actually said, well, we don't have a formal agreement. And so it took several years to actually then get an agreement in place. There is a master agreement, that's the so-called 123 agreement. I think it was signed in 2011. The 123 agreement is for cooperation in peaceful nuclear energy. That is still in place. But then the Rosatom, the nuclear weapon, nuclear energy complex, they said that's not good enough. We need to have a specific agreement if we're going to have Rosatom laboratories work with DOE laboratories. And so then this S&T agreement was signed. And it was signed by current Secretary Ernie Moniz and then his counterpart, Sergei Kirienko. And so it was important because that was going to be the official document that would revitalize S&T cooperation. And now they killed it. And so now we're back to square one. So none of that cooperation in science is going to happen.
See, to kind of follow up on that, I mean, one of the avenues that was very important and that I had the opportunity to participate a little bit in, and you certainly very much more, were the joint American and Russian Academy of Science activities, which was, I think, very, very important for both sides, and also provided a kind of windows on the nuclear activities in both countries. In fact, I think I visited many of the nuclear facilities that I did through the auspices of these joint academy projects. Can you say anything about how that cooperation persists or doesn't at the moment, in this moment in time?
So 2 years ago, in 14, when I was there, actually, when I took that photo, I went to see Vladimir Fortov, who's now the president of the Russian Academy of Sciences. I've known him well since 1988. And he told me he had just had a meeting with Putin not too long before, and he told him that I want the Russian Academy of Sciences to cooperate freely, with the rest of the world. And so Fortov said, we have not been told that we can't cooperate. However, things have gotten progressively worse since that time. So there's some cooperation still through the Russian Academy of Sciences or their institutes up at Dubna looking for the heavy elements and so forth. So there's still a little bit of that, but even that's been scaled back. And as we discussed in your office before this, since our interaction with Rosatom, that is the laboratories with Rosatom, has been cut off for the time being, then what I decided to do was go work with the universities, in particular with MIFI, Moscow Engineering Physics Institute. And as Julia and Sarah can attest, they were part of our American team going over there in May. We had this great session with the Russian students and young professionals, and they were supposed to come here to Stanford next week, and they cut that off. So it looks like now the Russian Academy of Sciences, cut back, the universities cut back, and so that makes it very difficult. All of that, we shouldn't just put the blame for the way this has gone strictly on the Russian government, because after Crimea, there were several things that the American government did that did not help the case of scientific interactions. And that is, the word from Washington was, in essence, Russia has to learn a lesson that it can't be business as usual. And business as usual also meant that our people weren't allowed to go to some of their standard conferences that they had gone to before. Once our people didn't go, they didn't come back. So there are two signs of some hope. I was going to show one of them. I'll show that one. One was the cooperation for the Iran deal, and there the Russians didn't just consent and get out of the way. The Russians actively supported that deal. So I think that's a positive move. The second is it looks like we're still going to be able to get the Russians to go to some international conferences. So there was just a big plutonium conference in Baden-Baden, plutonium science conference in September, and the Russians came and the American labs came, so they were allowed to get together there. That's the sort of thing that happened during Soviet times. I met the Russians first in '75 in Baden-Baden at a plutonium conference. So it looks like we're back to that they'll allow them some reach out, but not much. And so a good part of how they're going to respond is going to depend as to the approach that the U.S. government takes.
Let me just see if do we have some other? Yes, Amy?
Hi, I'd say thanks for this. This has really been wonderful, sort of reliving a history that some of us lived through. I have two sides of the question, which is, how much of this story are you able to sort of put before people in our Congress so that we revitalize the interest in a positive sort of push to have a bipartisan approach to this issue? Because it is a really good story. It's the side that doesn't get pushed at all, and all I hear is the cost and how things are falling apart. And secondly, on the Russian side, do you get a sense that there is a group within Russia doing something similar to what you're trying to do, which is tell the good story to sort of counter the negativity?
So on the U.S. side, it was my plan. Of course, Congress not only doesn't read 1,000-page books.
No.
So my idea was that one would take it from here and sort of cascade it down in various articles. And so I'm still in the process of sort of planning that and catching the right vehicles as to how to do that. And in the past, I've often, given talks at Congress, but there are various congressional fora where one could do that, and I certainly would plan to do that. And it is important because most of today's Congress will have almost no idea of what was done. So I think that's very important, and for the public also in general. It's just a good story. On the Russian side, they're trying to rewrite the narrative in this bad direction. We had a meeting right here that Bill pulled together with Nonproliferation, and we had the Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov here. And I spoke with him about this. And his comment was, yes, this lab to lab, it was very good. It was very helpful in the 90s, but the times have changed. It's gone. It's history. So that's what we run in mostly. But in addition now, it's sort of getting worse than that, of actually trying to change the narrative by not admitting that these things happen. So the book initially was going to be co-authored, co-edited by three of us, and that is Yevgeny Avron, Radi Alkayev, and myself. And they had to pull out about 18 months ago. They were going to print the book over there, and they were enthusiastic as can be. And then they were told they had to pull out. And so I had to do everything I could to get the articles permission to actually publish. And the nuclear scientist people, Alkayev, Avron, and so forth, pushed it through that they allowed me to keep this stuff and have it published. Now, for the most part, people like Anton Klopkov will just tell you it's not the right time to tell the story. There's a very popular magazine in Moscow called Rare Earth, of all things. You may have seen it. And they're going to do, have done already, an interview with me about the book. And so it's going to be published in Russian, in Moscow. I'm told by my colleagues that a lot of people read that. It tells the story, and it tells the story the way I just told the story. That, this is a great story for the Russians, for themselves, and they ought to be proud of it. But I think unless I see things having turned back to at least as bad as when I first got to the laboratory 51 years ago at Los Alamos, of just not being able to reach across and trying to change the history of some of the good things that happened. So, but anyway, that doesn't mean I'm going to give up. It just means it's going to take a little longer.
Now, one thing we might explore, I'm looking at Julia in particular, since she's taken the lead in establishing these periodic discussions between Monterey students and students at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations on different topics. Maybe we can find a time next semester, if possible, to kind of feature the kind of story that Sig has told. I think it would be really important, and I mean, at least one occasion when I've done this, you know, I might say some opening remarks, and then we have American and Russian students interacting, asking questions, reporting on these activities. I think that would
oral
be,
history.
well, you know, perhaps, but I mean, the idea here would be more to try to promote a dialogue between Russian and American students on this theme, but they have one of the architects, you know, present, and it's conceivable that you could have somebody also on the Moscow end, but just encourage it, since we seem to still be able to conduct these kinds of discussions, and particularly if we had next semester, knock on wood, several of our Russian students in the new degree program, they could be here, as well as having the other Russians who aren't part of the program on the other side. So it's just another thing to contemplate.
Yeah, no,
If you haven't done
taking it all
so
down, yeah. Thank you.
already. Some other.
So Bill, yeah, Bill, let me just cut in for 1 second.
Mhm.
So one of the reasons this book is so thick, you know, 1,000 pages, is because we did try to aim at a number of audiences, including the historians, because I know the historian colleagues I have at Stanford, they're the only ones who dig through this sort of stuff, and we have this. That information is no place else. It's not written up anyplace else. So we had it, and Alla Kasyanova, who works with me, is now actually compiling a much more in-depth electronic version of this. And so what we want to do is put that out there for students of non-proliferation, of the history, in order for them to be able to dig through these documents.
That's
Yes.
good. Sylvia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much for the fantastic presentation. I'm Sylvia. I'm a visiting fellow over here. I'm from India. I wanted to understand from you, since we spoke extensively about how the present day geopolitical conditions do not necessarily facilitate that both the United States and Russia looks at understanding from these historical lessons of Cold War and and expand areas of cooperation. And in one of your slides, you spoke about finding common grounds, and one of it stated finding issues of strategic stability. Now, the JCPOA was one deal where Russia, the P5+1 and Russia and US came together and cooperated successfully. How do you assess both countries looking at specific geographic areas, say for example DPRK or Pakistan, and whether these both Russia and US can come together and work on these specific regions, because I understand both the countries have serious concerns about Pakistan and DPRK.
So terrific question. So for the case of Iran, the way the Iran deal was struck was precisely to find common ground. And what Kerry and the U.S. administration found with those partners that you mentioned, Russia, China, and the EU+3, the only common ground was nuclear. That was the common ground. They couldn't even agree on missiles. So the reason missiles aren't part of the Iran deal is because they couldn't agree. There was no common ground. There was certainly no common ground on Iraq, on Syria, on Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. So because there was no common ground, that was left out. They focused on common ground and they came to this. So that's precisely, that's the lesson one has to take away, is find that common ground. So what is the common ground now? So in the spirit of what you just laid out, Bill had the Russians here with the Americans to talk about North Korea. I think sort of the shorthand version of the Russian view of North Korea is, look, the North Koreans love you guys. They just want to talk to you. They want you to talk to them. You know, and you guys just have it wrong. And so, yeah, we talk about North Korea, but diplomatically we haven't made any gains because of the U.S.-Russia cooperation. But, you know, perhaps there can be some. Certainly for U.S.-China, that is the key to find common ground on North Korea. On Pakistan, I haven't found anybody in Russia who really wants to talk about Pakistan. I worked Pakistan there with Pakistan. You know, the issue would be common ground with Pakistan, U.S., India, in terms of strategic stability in South Asia, which is, you know, really a key problem. Right now, the common ground, if you're going to deal with it geographically, to me would be Central Asia. That's the common ground. So if you look at Central Asia, you know, from Kazakhstan to the other stans, you look at the potential of, you know, of course there's already drug traffic, you look at potential nuclear traffic, you look at all those things happening. It's not good for Russia if things go bad there, it's not good for the United States. We ought to be able to say, and by the way, even though I told you this great story about Semipalatinsk, in a place like that, you're never done. You're just never done. So there's stuff that's left there in Central Asia. We both have the same. I've been trying to get the Russians to come meet the Kazakhs, say, get the Russians to talk to us, and the Russians don't want to talk right now. So you're absolutely right. So that would be my number one would be Central Asia.
I think we're going to have to wrap up now. I'm really reluctant to stop the session because I'm always hypnotized when Sig starts speaking. And this was an issue, although we've worked together on it, I have not heard him present before. I really want to congratulate you on persevering to produce these two tremendously important volumes, and to the extent that we can help in a variety of ways in disseminating the findings, and particularly making some of the points available to our Russian colleagues. We're really anxious to do it, Sig. So it's marvelous to have you here. Please join me again in thanking Dr. Edwards.